Here at So Serene, we're creating learning and growing with every project. In this video, I'll show you how I upcycled this robe into a cute two-piece pajama set. To start off with, I sketched this out in my sewing project planner just so I had an idea of what it is I actually wanted to make. Originally, I thought I would go and buy a new sewing pattern, but I realized I have this two-piece set that I really love, and so I thought I would just use that as my sewing pattern. I was having a closer look at how it was finished to make sure that I can incorporate some of that onto my actual pieces. To make my sewing pattern, I just traced the top and the shorts onto tracing paper. So I outlined the actual pieces itself. To make this, though, technically it was only about 4 to 5 pieces that I needed. So that was a front and back piece for the top, a front and back piece for the bottom, and then a long piece to cut into straps and another piece to make a decorative finish on the shorts. So tracing the pieces onto the paper isn't actually necessary. I just do it because I want to grow my pattern collection and I just prefer working that way. So with my pieces cut now, I was just quickly checking that the back piece and the front piece will line up. To hide away the raw edges on the top and the bottom, I decided I was just going to do a double fold. So I just double folded that and then sewed that on my machine using a single stitch. Then once that was done, I just lined up the front and back pieces and sewed them together on the side. I think I left about a 1 centimeter seam allowance for this. Then next I started on the straps. I used a long rectangular piece of fabric, 8 centimeters by about 60, and folded it in so that the raw edges were hidden. And I was just pressing that to keep it in place. And then I sewed that on my machine using a single stitch. After which I put my top on the mannequin just to kind of measure out how long I wanted the straps to be. Then I measured 6 inches from each side to make sure that the straps at the back were equally spaced. With the first try on, I noticed there was extra fabric at the top, so it wasn't lying flat. So to fix that, I just added in a dart on both sides. Once I was happy with the placement of the straps, I tacked that in place and then sewed that on my machine. And that was the top done. I then moved on to finishing the shorts. I had cut 2 pieces for the front and I sewed those together, and I cut 2 pieces for the back and I sewed those together. And I then double folded the hem. I then used a 1/4 inch piecing foot with a guide to see if that would help me be able to just sew a straight line. I've got all these different sewing feet, so I'm just trying to find different ways in my projects that I can start to incorporate them. And this is how it looked on my first attempt. I then was sewing the front and back pieces together, starting by pinning the crotch together and then pinning the sides together before sewing that on my machine. And I left a 1 centimeter seam allowance for the sides. And after that, this is how the shorts were looking. I turned it inside out and I didn't quite like how the seams were looking, so I decided to finish them on my overlocker. Next, I attached my waistband. I had cut 2 pieces for this to go with the front and back pieces. And to get the length, I just measured the top of each section. And then I had the pieces be about maybe 5 inches in width so that I could fold it over. So then it would be about 2.5. And then by the time I've added the seam allowance, the waistband itself would be 2 inches. So I sewed that on and then I finished it on my overlocker as well. And so you'll see here, once this is finished, you'll see that there is actually an opening on the waistband. And I did this just to make it easier for me to feed through the elastic. And the elastic I'm using is about 1 inch thick. So I've just put that on a large safety pin and I'm just feeding that through on both sides. Then I just did a quick stretch test to make sure that it wasn't too tight or too loose before I cut my elastic. And to keep it in place, I sewed it on my machine back and forth about 3-4 times. And then the finishing touch was just to sew on this decorative drawstring piece. And that is finished. And I love how this came out, and I've worn it already so many times. And then this is just a close-up of the dart that was added and how the seams were finished for the top. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment and subscribe for more, and leave in the comments, let me know how you think this turned out. And if you've any other upcycling ideas, feel free to put it in the comments.